I like to tell people about this too, because it's not always sometimes you'll have your own idea out of the blue and you pursue it and it's amazing and it's awesome. But sometimes it comes from a prompt from someone else. Like I don't, the seeds of what Avatar became were in us somewhere. And like once we had that prompt, we were off to the races and like had a million ideas of what this world could be, how we could do our take on what a myth animation could look like.
Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artist makers and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. I'd love to invite you to stop by dailycreativehabit.com. I have created all sorts of resources for you because I truly believe that when you create, we all win. So I want to see as many of you stepping into your creativity fully, closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I want to help you do that. So I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I've written a book, Make Fun a Habit. I have all sorts of free resources like this podcast and a Facebook group called Daily Creative Habit. Also, the paid membership for Daily Creative Habit, where we get together with like-minded creators, all pushing in the same direction, encouraging each other, and saying we're going to show up every single day to create something to get our work out there into the world. So if you would like to be a part of any of those things, again, stop by dailycreativehabit.com or simply visit my website, which is mikebrennan.me. Hey, on the show today, I have Michael Dante DiMartino, who is an animation powerhouse. I mean, he has directing credits from, shows maybe you've heard of, like King of the Hill, Family Guy, and most notably, he's the co-creator of the award-winning animated Nickelodeon series, Avatar, The Last Airbender, and its sequel, The Legend of Korra. And we talk not only about animation and about his story and his process, his journey, but we also talk about how he balances doing a lot of the client and commercial work and then some more of the personal projects and passion work. And he is also notably a writer. He's an author. And we talk a little bit about his new book, Both Here and Gone. So this one is a great episode because, we just tackle that whole multi-passionate creative and multiple expressions. And from somebody who is obviously, he knows what he's doing and not only has the commercial success, but also has the creative discipline to pay attention to what's important to him creatively. And so I'm going to get out of the way here, let you hear our conversation. Here is my creative chat with Michael Dante DiMartino. Well, Mike, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks. Great to meet you.
I love it. It's a fellow Mike. I don't know that I've had many other Mikes on the show.
Oh, wow. All right. I'm honored then.
Yes. This is good stuff. So that being our common base there, as well as, being artists, right? I love the fact that, we're going to get into all the different projects and stuff that you've done and are doing. But this sense of, being a creative person and following that dream, following that passion, is something that is a privilege to do, but also can be loaded with a lot of ups and downs, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to know, what was your earliest memory of you realizing, hey, I'm a creative person? Like, was it drawing, painting? Was it something else?
Yeah, it was definitely drawing and art from a pretty early age, as far back as I remember, was drawing. And then, in like grade school and then into high school, I started taking it more seriously and remembering, like, could I do this as a job? Because like I grew up in Vermont, it was not super rural, but pretty rural, and I had a great high school that had great arts programs. I also did music and theater, so I was always doing the more creative side of things. I wasn't super into sports or very good at sports, so I
Same.
stuck with the yeah, I stuck with the art and reading and writing and all that stuff. But yeah, I focused on art through high school, and then as I was getting toward senior year, I really wanted to go to art school, and uh, I remember talking to the guidance counselor at the time and telling her that, and she was like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Like,
Hmm.
she wasn't very. Luckily, I had parents who were super supportive, and you know, when I if they knew I was serious about something, they took it seriously, and so yeah, I went to a art school in Baltimore for freshman year, and then I transferred to the Rhode Island School of Design for the rest of my college
Yeah.
career, mainly to
Nice.
focus on animation because I found out they had a animation program there, and I really wanted to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. And it's funny. I've had similar situations. Unfortunately, so like the whole going to art school question, I think
yeah,
that's a thing that's dicey. It can go either way. And certainly for me, my parents were supportive, for me. I was like, I ended up going to the School of Visual Arts, and,
hmm
but they were certainly a little more practically minded and going like, are you sure you don't want to be a doctor or a
hmm
lawyer or something that can make
right,
money, right?
yeah,
Which is understandable, right? Because so many of the stories of like the quote starving artist, no one wants that to be their child, and so it comes from a
sure.
place of love. But certainly, to have that support, that's pretty tremendous, early on. And I think I had heard or read someplace that you actually have a shared love for. You used to draw a lot of cartoons and comics and stuff like, Garfield and Bloom County. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I taught myself.
Yeah.
Like early on was like cartooning and stuff, and Calvin and Hobbes I remember
Oh
loving.
yeah.
But yeah, I would always do it like, in like sixth or seventh grade, like the yearbooks we had. I would be the guy who would like draw the covers for the our class yearbook or something like
Oh
that,
yeah.
or the poster for the musical theater that year or something like that. I was usually doing that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was more of like a cartoony style, I guess. And then I got more into like fine arts and painting and that sort of thing, but found my way back to animation.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I also did the same thing with Bloom County Opus. I used to draw him a lot,
Yeah,
and Garfield
yeah.
and all the stuff, and practicing those styles and things. So I'm hearing also that you're probably like a multi-passionate creative. So like many
Yeah.
different interests in creative forms. And I'm sure that has played into your evolution as a creative person and the work that you've done. But just to go back into like, okay, so you're at Rhode Island School of Design, and you're there for animation, and you're thinking, okay, this is now what I want to do. What does that look like for you then, in terms of you being set up for success in that school, and then being able to go, okay, I'm going to go into the field now. I'm actually going to be able to get a job in this. Like, how did that work? Was there a vision, and it kind of was like, yes, this is exactly how it's supposed to be, and you're off to the races? Or was there a little bit of like, we're going off roading?
Uh, yeah, definitely a lot of off-roading. I mean, going, I didn't know what to expect, going into school there. The one big takeaway that I still think about, and that I think was a valuable experience, was that, especially there, like it was much more about like making films and
Mm,
having a voice and finding what you wanted to say, and there was some craft stuff and some technical, like learning how to animate, but it was not like you weren't learning character animation like they do at like Cal Arts or something like Disney style character animation. It was much more experimental, you know, animation from like the teachers were all like experimental animators from like the 70s and 80s and stuff. But I think the valuable part of that was like you had to figure out a film, like for senior year, you have to make basically your classes make a film for the whole year. Um, so it was a challenge to like you have to be the creator and the producer and the manager of like if you're working with other people or getting other people to help you like I did. So it was a great experience I think that part definitely helped set me up for my career because like I am not like the greatest draftsman or artist around. Like there's plenty of other amazing artists I've met over the years. Uh, but I think what my skill set me up for was to be able to take these ideas, to take like in my first job, which was like a story being storyboard artist, you get a script for the show and you have to draw all the pictures for it and break down like what the how the characters are moving and acting based on the voice acting. Um, so I think it really helped me set up for that first stage of my career where it was like just showing up for work,
Right.
getting the job done, and then learning on the job through there, and just learning more about how productions are run, all the different aspects of what goes into making a TV show, and then I took all those learnings, and my friend and I, Brian, came up with the idea for Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then so by the time we had that show between the two of us, we had a ton of experience in various aspects of television animation. So we kind of knew the how we wanted to run a show and what pitfalls were, and it's
Right.
still never easy. I mean, we're 20 plus years on, we're still working on some new shows, and it's still like you think you've figured it out, and then you'll get a new curveball, and it's like you always have to be adaptable and kind of open minded. Like you think you've figured out how something works and it'll work for a while until it doesn't work anymore. And you got to
Yeah.
figure out like, how do I adapt? How do I change? How can I try this a little differently than I used to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the ever going sense of creative problem solving, right? I mean, there's always something
Yeah.
new ground to take or new problems to solve. I want to just touch on something you mentioned. So as you mentioned, you came up with the Avatar: The Last Airbender, this idea, this concept. Where did this come from, and like, how did you know that this was going to be a thing that you were going to invest in to the level at which you did? Was it something that you knew early on that like, oh, we got something gold here, or was this kind of like, hey, here's an idea we're pursuing, and then it just kind of organically kept leading to the next step, unfolding?
Yeah, it was an interesting way it came about because my friend and I wanted to pitch a show, and we had, between the two of us had a bunch of ideas. I had made my own independent animated film at that point, called Atomic Love, that I'd gone to a few film festivals. And so I was like trying to get a version of that made somewhere maybe, and he had some other ideas. And then, but the actual genesis of this show was that we had met with the head of development at Nickelodeon, and he sort of laid out like what Nickelodeon was looking for at the time, which was an action adventure mythology kind of show. And so that got our wheels turning. So it was much more, I like to tell people about this too, because it's not always the sometimes you'll have your own idea out of the blue and you pursue it and it's amazing
Right.
and it's awesome. But sometimes it comes from a prompt from someone else. Like
Hmm.
I don't, the seeds of what Avatar became were in us somewhere. And like once we had that prompt, we were off to the races and like had a million ideas of what this world could be, how we could do our take on what a myth animation could look like, inspired by Miyazaki's films, and leaning more toward other cultures than like the Western tropes of knights and shining armor and that sort of thing. So that was really the genesis was this this prompt that came from the studio. And so I think that's the other thing about especially my career has been this balance of like, yes, we have ideas, we have vision, we have things we want to achieve creatively, and at the same time you're balancing that with a giant business and corporation that has its own needs
Right.
and desires, and hopefully you can find the Venn diagram where like those two overlap pretty well. And I think we've been lucky that we have been able to do that.
Yeah. I'm sure that you bump into moments where you're like, okay, I have to concede on certain things. How do you know where to stand your ground and where to go, okay, we're going to concede on this and just play along, and so we can actually get this done.
Yeah, I think it's when the core idea of something is being questioned, I guess. The example that we ran into was when we were doing the sequel series, Legend of Korra. Um, we They wanted to do a new series. We pitched this idea of a female, younger, teenage avatar, and they were all for it. And then one day, we got word that like, can you make the lead character a boy? And we were like, what? That was so we batted around some ideas and
Yeah.
decided, no, this is the core of the show. Like, this is the point of making this show, is that it's a young female teenage lead. So that one we stuck our ground, and they a couple days later like, okay, you can make the show. All right. So that was a fight worth fighting for. But you get notes from studios all the time. Most of them can be helpful. Some of them maybe not as helpful, but usually it's like don't sweat the small stuff. Like it might be annoying. Like I like it better this way, but like, is it really going to like affect the overall experience of the show
Hmm.
or the character or something? Like as long as it's not like changing those core elements, you usually can find a compromise.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny too. I'm thinking someone listening, they're thinking to themselves like, wow, like that would be my dream. That would be my goal to work with like a major studio, to work on a major project, right? Obviously someone wants to invest their talents in some place that where it can have an impact. What would you say to somebody who's listening that might be surprising to thinking, okay, if I just got there, then life would be grand, right? Then I've had made it, right? Because we all know that there's always a next, and there's always things that are hidden.
Yeah.
What maybe is something you could share that would be not so obvious for someone who might be thinking along those lines?
That's a great question. I mean, look, making art of any kind is hard. I think it does become even more challenging when you are working for a big studio, or you have, a lot of money involved. Like it also levels up. Like I've learned, like, there's TV animation, which is one level of, budget, and then you got live action TV, and then you got feature films, and like the more money that gets put in, the more scrutiny you get put under. So with Avatar, it was an interesting experience because we were sort of this outlier at the studio. We were making a story that was being told sequentially. It was this anime style, which at the time studios weren't really making. So there were a lot of things that like didn't fit the like what Nickelodeon was known for at the time. And so in a way that benefited us because they were kind of like, we think this is cool, but we don't really know what to do with it. We'll let the guys make their show. And so that in that respect, it was actually a great experience of like, we got to experiment, and, we made some mistakes and whatnot, but like in the end, it was turned out to be a great show, and it's still being watched all these years later, which is wild. But I think it's there is a tendency maybe to expect, especially if you're creating something that like you're just going to get to do with what you want. And like, even though, yes, we were largely left alone, um, you are still working for, they are the client, I guess. I would say, the studio is the client and you are the creative person coming in. But it is always this kind of client, creator relationship that you have to balance, and there will be compromises, and but hopefully at the end of the day you can feel proud of like the thing that came out of it, and it'll surprise you too, of the things you thought um you wanted to do in the first place, that after a bunch of notes and back and forth you find a new solution, and it actually like made the show better.
Yeah. So being open to the outside influences of editing and feedback, that's always a
Totally. And
tricky thing, right?
especially, yeah, depending what it's different if you're writing a novel versus writing on a TV show, but with anything with that kind of scope or whatever, you're working not just with the studio, but with other creative people. So it's like
Yeah.
you're learning from them, they're hopefully learning from you, but there's a, the artist temperaments all coming together and, clashing for better or worse sometimes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Uh, I'm curious to know, like, do you have a pretty good balance of like the client work versus like the passion projects type stuff?
Yeah, that's
Is
what I've
it?
been trying to do over the years. So I mean, Avatar's been awesome, super rewarding. But even while we were making those shows, I was getting into novel writing, which was like through the shows, I was getting better at writing and learning more how to like break a story and how to structure stuff narratively. And so that led to after we finished The Legend of Korra, I got a publishing deal to write a couple middle grade fantasy novels. So I wrote those, which was super fun. And also, a new challenge. I always like new creative challenges.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, I've always had the writing bug. So like that was fun to do. And then I sort of didn't do writing for a while. And then around 2019, I had hit this kind of creative rut, like professionally and just like with myself and stuff. And I decided I just want to write something and I want to try to do something different than like the fantasy stuff I was known for. So I started writing this novel that became Both Here and Gone, the new novel I released this year. And yeah, it was a new way of going about writing for me, because in TV it's very structured in a way in that you're in a writing room with other writers, you're talking about the story constantly, you're putting note cards on the wall to break down like what's act 1, act 2, act 3. So it's very outline heavy, and structured, which I like. I like knowing what I'm going to write before I write it. But I wanted to write something so different. So I was like, I need a different process. Like just sitting here and outlining something isn't doing it for me right now. So I
Mm.
tried the National Novel Writing Month back in 2019 to write 50,000 words in a month. And it just started with this basic idea of this kid who's dealing with loss and grief, and his friend went through this traumatic accident and is waking up from a coma and looking for answers. So it was really just starting with that kind of basic idea. I didn't have the whole plot worked out. So I tried more of a free form thing where I would just write for that day and get the words out. And a lot of cool stuff came out of that process, which surprised me, like characters popping up that I hadn't had in my head originally, and plot elements and stuff. So that was a great experience to like try something different, I guess, like
Hmm.
shake up my usual creative process and find out like, oh, that could work too, like depending on the project. I think those kind of things too depend on, trying to find, I guess what I'm trying to say is like not every process works the same for the different mediums,
Mm.
So if maybe you're stuck in a rut or something, like just shake up the process a little bit and try it a different way.
Yeah. It's funny. I've often thought that too of encouraging people to go like, okay, you have this idea and maybe your natural inclination is for visual art. And you think, okay, the execution of this is going to be then visual art oriented for this idea. But allowing yourself enough room to play to go, well, what would this look like in written form? What would this look like in audio? Maybe as a
Yeah.
song, maybe as, like various modalities that you could execute this in, because maybe the idea is best executed in a way that's not readily apparent to you at first, right? And how you go about executing those in those various forms can be wildly different. And so being open to some of that stuff, right? Have you seen that, like, I guess the challenges and the similarities maybe of going to this place where, okay, I'm working on this show. There's this, heavy outline stuff, but now I'm taking part of that and bringing that over to your writing, but then also now you're open to something, as you said, you're being more spontaneous or whatever. Has that been something that has been energizing to you, or a little bit like unnerving?
No, it's all been good. I mean, after I finished the kind of rough draft of this novel, then I had to sort of see like, okay, what is this story? What am I trying to say with this story? How can I make it better? So then I would apply like more structure ideas and things I've learned and taken from like my work in TV. Um, and that process took several years, of off and on work, trying to refine it and really hone in on like what I was trying to say with the work as far as with the subject of grief. Like it was it's kind of a heavy topic and I wanted to make the book, but I still wanted to make the book accessible and like very readable and not like super depressing.
Yeah.
And the feedback I've gotten has been really good because people have said like, oh, they didn't know what to expect going in, but like, they're like, once I started, I couldn't stop reading and, turning the pages, which I think is a good sign of like, I was able to sort of meld this, I guess you would say more literary sensibility or something with what I've learned in TV of like pacing and wanting the reader to find out what happens next and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Why now for the themes that you were exploring? Like, were there things that you were kind of grappling with yourself or inspired by that you thought, okay, now I need to dive into these type of topics?
Yeah, at first it wasn't totally conscious in a way. I think that's the interesting thing about writing or art in general is you may have a vague sense of like you're wrestling with something, but if you're in that exploratory phase, often it is more about discovering what you're trying to get at. So yeah, with the book, it was the way I got there was kind of roundabout because it was like my initial idea for something I wanted to write was about a kid who played video games in the 80s, and a portion of that actually did make it into the book, but it wasn't that wasn't the story I was trying to tell. It actually led to this idea of like extra lives in video games and what happens when you die, and then this kid like wondering about that, and then his friend going through a near death experience. And then personally, I had, it probably took me many months to like for it to hit me, but like my dad died in 2008 when he was just in his 60s. And, I think those kinds of, it was a surprising loss at the time. And so like still, even though you grieve and go through those things, like I think those things just stay with you forever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and then the other part of like after I had started writing this and was revising it, was 2020 when the world shut down for
Mm-hmm.
COVID. And in the middle of writing this book about loss and grief and everything, I was just like, man, this is like everybody is dealing with this right now. So the
Yeah.
story became very much more about like the community around the main character Jack and all different permutations of grief and how different people grapple with it and are able to live with it or not live with it or avoid it
Yeah.
or face it. So it's really an exploration of that. And ultimately at the end, I I like to have stories that are hopeful, at the end,
Mm-hmm.
that there is, even if you've gone through like a difficult story or experience, that there is like some hope at the end that like you can get through this. Like it sucks and it's hard, but at the end of the day, we could, human beings are resilient and we can rise up and kind of move through these difficult times.
Yeah. In terms of the process of this, right? Like, are you someone who's more interested in, and like your reward is in the making of the thing, or is it more in the I've made it, now I'm bringing it out to people and getting to use what I've made as a connection to people, or is it a blend?
I think it's a blend. I mean, for this project, the book was definitely I'm just going to write this. I'm not telling anybody I'm writing this. This is not, I'm not writing it for a publisher. Like it was the first time in a long time that I've made something that was, it wasn't an assignment and it wasn't for TV and it wasn't, all these things. It was just like, it was mine. It was like my little secret side project for a few years. Um, but then, yeah, it's at a certain point, like, okay, I've worked as much as I can work on this. Like I can't revise it anymore. This is the best I think I could do. I did work with some editors and story consultants and stuff to help me, shape it and get a second, set of eyes on it. Cause that's always super helpful. Um, but yeah, then I decided, um, like the path took me to self-publishing this book because I had those first two books I mentioned. I was through a traditional publishing deal, and I learned a lot, through that process. Um, but for some reason, I just wanted more ownership over this one, and I wasn't making it for money. Like I have my day job. I didn't need like, oh, I need a big publishing deal or anything. I did explore like some agents, like if they were interested, and there was some interest, but it was the funny thing is it was the comment I kept getting back was like it's not commercial enough. And in my head, I was like, well, that was kind of the point of writing it, was to write something that wasn't. I was like, I know I can do the commercial stuff. I've done that before. I wanted to see if I could do something different. So, but I do try to. So the self-publishing thing is super interesting to me because it is about taking back creative people being able to take back some ownership and being in charge of their books. And there's so many outlets now of getting your work out there. So yeah, I hired a book designer or a book cover designer, got it professionally edited, like did all the stuff I know you have to do to get a book out there, so that it was professionally presented and everything. So it's been a good response. I mean, it's not a super commercial book, but I'm hoping like when people hear about it, like the people who have read it have been really moved by it. I think it is a super meaningful book that has touched a lot of people so far. And I'm hoping over the years, like for me, this is like a long game. Like I hope this story sticks around and people discover it, through the decades and whatnot. And, that's what I love about novels too, is like that you can pick up a book from 100, 200 years ago and it doesn't age the same way like a TV show or movies do. Like it's
Right.
You can still read, classic books and they're surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you talk about the projects that you've been involved with and the personal work and just your approach and methodology, your process, there's something that comes out to me and says, here's somebody who is willing to change and adapt and grow into whatever the latest challenge is. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but what role does curiosity play in the midst of all that for you?
Oh, that's a huge part of it. I mean, that's my one thing I try to keep in mind for myself. But if people ask like, what advice do you have for people? It's usually like, stay curious, because I mean, the biggest killer to any creative process, I think, is just like thinking you've got it all figured out or thinking you have all the answers. Cause like, there's no way. Like even now I'm still learning or trying to learn like how to tell stories in a better way or a more emotional way or more impactful way. Especially with novels, which is, I still feel like with this novel, I felt like I finally kind of knew what I was doing and I could, sometimes you're just trying things out and you're like throwing stuff at the wall to see if it'll work. But this one, I felt a little more intentional, at least during the editing process of like what I was going for. But yeah, if you just got to stay like curious, and there's so much. I mean, I love learning in general. I think I've always kind of been a curious person. Like, so for me, it has come naturally. Like, even if I wasn't doing my day job, I would probably just sit around and read all day and try to learn some new stuff and gain knowledge and wisdom and that sort of thing. But and then it's a feedback loop. The more you're like open to new ideas, like those ideas can then seep into your work and in ways that maybe you wouldn't have expected.
Yeah. Yeah. Along the lines of like the change and evolution, I'm sure you've seen change even within the industry that you're in, and how creativity has even been impacted. The hot button issues right now, AI, right? People have
Yeah.
fallen on both sides of this, of going, the machines are coming for us, and that's it. Or people saying,
Right.
hey, we're embracing this wholeheartedly, and then sometimes somewhere in the middle. Have you seen, even in the short amount of time, AI impacting the industry, and if so, how?
I mean, hasn't totally creeped into like animation yet. It's obviously there lurking. Yeah, I mean, I think I fall somewhere in the middle there. I'm always a balance, like not extremist sort of guy. So
Yeah.
I totally, appreciate the concerns people have for it. And at the same time, some of this is kind of exciting and interesting, especially for uh, I think people go to the extreme of thinking, oh, AI is going to write a book or write a movie. And I'm like, have you tried to use AI? Because it's not going to write the book you think it's going to write. Um, what I think it's awesome for is like brainstorming, because
Hmm.
it's like when I'm writing a book, like usually I would just be writing notes to myself, on the side. Like, what about this? What about this? You're kind of talking to yourself, like trying to figure out what you want to do. But now having like kind of a virtual writing partner, so to speak, where you're just like, I have this idea. Give me 10 ideas of like what I could do with this. And then, then it's like you're kind of having a conversation with the AI, which yes, on some level is a little weird and creepy. But on another level, I've been surprised in a good way of like how helpful it's been, especially in those kind of situations where you're just you're just trying to like figure out what you want to say with something or whatever. So that's, the times I've used it is for that, and for editing, it's becoming things like Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly already were kind of
Hmm.
like the proto AI sort of writing
Right.
tools, and now they're incorporating more into them. So, but you're still gotta watch what it's doing. It's like anything.
Hmm.
It's like you don't just take it. I think that's what maybe the misconception is like you have to do whatever AI tells you. It's like I don't know. I just edit things if it gives a suggestion I don't like, I don't use it. I don't.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, as far as like the animation industry, I mean, certainly from when we started Avatar to now, um, just the use of digital art in general that's been the biggest change. Because like when we were doing Avatar, we were still doing storyboards on with pencil and paper,
Mm.
and if you needed to blow something up, you went to the photocopier and blew it up
Hmm.
10% or whatever. And then by the time we got to Korra, everyone was doing storyboards digitally, and everything was just had moved to that system. So um, yeah, the interesting thing for our shows is like we still love the 2D process and the look and everything. So we're still trying to find that middle ground of like still having hand drawn animation, 2D look, but then using the technology to do things that we could never do, 20 years ago, as far as like environments or moving the camera around in kind of a 3D space with 2D characters. So that stuff's been fun to kind of figure out and
Mm.
use technology in a way to help the storytelling.
Yeah. And I guess that's the balance too, right? Is figuring out where is it appropriate and where does it not get in the way and trip over the story and what you're trying to say and how
Yeah.
you're saying it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it should just be another tool in the toolbox, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Continuing the thought of like evolution and change and things, as you look forward, right? What is something that's like a next area that you would just love to step into? Something that you haven't done yet that you're like, this would be totally cool if I could do a project like in this space or around this theme or something.
Um, yeah, for my own stuff, it is exploring more novel writing. I think that's where my heart is going. um, uh, yeah, I mean, we're doing cool stuff with Avatar expanding the franchise. So like my day job now is it's kind of this interesting balance of I'm kind of more playing a producer or a manager role now where I'm overseeing the franchise and still creating stuff and being creative, but it's much more on the producing is the best job title I can I can that people will understand. It's like I'm not doing the writing anymore as much. I'm not drawing anymore really for that stuff. It's just working with different teams and managing artists and overseeing the kind of the creative vision of the whole franchise because we're branching out from first two shows into other projects. And there's a feature film that's been announced, so I can mention that. That'll be out in a couple of years.
Awesome.
So that's, I mean, that part has been a new experience of like making a film, like a feature film. Is it, you know, definitely had a lot of challenges on that of like how do you take a story that we typically would tell over 20 episodes and find a story that works in 90 minutes, you know, those kind of
Right.
challenges. So yeah, we'll see where all that goes. I mean, it's that part's definitely new for me, or I should say it's an extension of what I used to do, where it's like it used to be more even, where it's like half the time I'd be writing or creating stuff, and half the time you're playing producer or manager. Now I've kind of moved into more of the producer manager side of things, which again is creative and is fun at times, but then I do have that like longing to like, oh, I still want to write and I still want to create stuff. So I think I will still just continue to pursue that, you know, as like side projects and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
that makes a lot of sense, and I think early on, like if I look back at me when I graduated art school and getting some of my first positions, the trap I fell into was thinking like, oh, this one position is going to be it's going to check all the boxes, right? It's
right.
going to let me be creatively, free as much as I want to be. It's going to let me be successful in some things and work on big clients and all the things. But you quickly realize that there is no one size that, checks all the boxes, one role. And I think
Yeah.
diversifying some of those things and realizing that if these are things that are important to you to have in your life, it doesn't necessarily all come from the same source. And so it's figuring out how do you make this part of your life. And what I'm hearing from you is that you've been able to do that. You've been able to have the places where you're maybe in a little bit more of a high level management type thing and producer, but then also taking, your writing and putting some more creativity into those type of projects that are maybe a little bit more personal to you, and giving you an expression point. So that's awesome. I love to hear that. And so I applaud you for that.
Yeah, cool. No, that's a great point about not not expecting your job to fulfill all your creative desires and goals, because I think that's definitely a recipe for frustration and disappointment. And yeah, using whatever job you have as a way to learn more about whatever craft you're working on, even if you're just starting out and maybe you get a job as a PA or something on a show or a movie or something. It's like, well, now you're in the door. You get to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. And like,
Yes.
you're gonna see like amazing stuff that inspires you and stuff that you're like, whoa, that's not cool. I would not do that on this show. Like, so you're gonna, so that if someday you do, get into a higher role or something, like you'll have that experience of knowing what works, what doesn't, what you liked about a production, what you didn't. So even the maybe the most or the least creatively satisfying jobs or something, you can still learn from them, I think of how to do something better down the road.
Yeah. It all becomes ingredients if you're open and willing to take all the stuff and learn and adapt it into whatever's next for you, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. I always love speaking with fellow creative people who are, within the visual realm as well, and then also writing. And I love that you're pursuing these things, like I said, and just wish you all the best in this. And where can people go to find your books and your, all the things, all the links, whatever you want to lay on people? Yeah. Here's your opportunity.
I'll make it simple. Thank you for a great conversation. I have a website, michaeldantedimartino.com. So that's just my name, full name. And there you'll find the links to the books, and all the, mainly it's a website for my like publishing side of my projects, but that it does include some, like I wrote some Legend of Korra graphic novels. I did a fiction audio podcast a few years back for Audible. You can explore around. As far as the new book, there's links on there. You can buy the book off my website, or it's available on Amazon. So you can just search for either my name or Both Here and Gone, which is the title. I hope people check it out.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to put that link in the show notes so people can click and
awesome.
Go right away, real easy. Put the cookies on the bottom shelf, as we say.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much again for our time today, and I wish you all the best in all the projects you're working on.
Oh, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.